The national power grid of Cuba has officially collapsed, leaving an entire nation in total darkness right next to the world's largest superpower. This unprecedented failure has triggered a complete suspension of state functions, where hospital ventilators are stopping and essential food supplies are rotting in darkened homes. The reason this collapse is so important is that it shows how modern economic warfare can physically erase a nation from global supply chains. By leveraging the dominance of the US dollar, the United States government has demonstrated its power to isolate the Cuban economy to the point of structural failure. As this central energy system fails, the impact is rapidly spreading beyond the island and creating a new wave of migration instability across the Western Hemisphere. According to recent data from the International Energy Agency, the vital shipments of Venezuelan oil that once sustained Cuba have effectively dropped to zero. Many financial reports and research data also confirm that the exclusion of Cuba from global banking networks has caused import prices to skyrocket beyond measurement. This state of economic isolation in Cuba is not a random accident, but is the result of a precisely engineered strategy designed to cut off every remaining lifeline. This is why Cuba's vulnerability to sanctions serves as a critical case study for global powers observing the actual reach of economic influence. For international observers, this extreme level of isolation reveals a fundamental shift in how geopolitical pressure is applied in the 21st century. So the real question becomes clear. Why has the United States government sustained such an intense level of pressure on Cuba for over 60 years? To find the answer, we must look back to the very first moves on this brutal chessboard and discover where the story of Cuba's once brilliant past began to change forever. In the middle of the 20th century, Cuba was widely celebrated as the Pearl of the Antilles and served as the primary playground for the United States. At that time, Havana was a city of immense wealth and luxury, filled with grand American-owned hotels and vibrant casinos that drew wealthy visitors from across the globe. The level of Cuba's prosperity during that era was so visible that its per capita television ownership was among the highest in the world, reflecting a modern and consumer-driven society that many other nations envied. But behind this glittering surface, the Cuban economy was deeply integrated with American interests, as United States corporations owned more than 80% of the island's sugar mills and strategic refineries. This period represented the peak of a dependent growth model, where Cuban prosperity was almost entirely fueled by the flow of American capital and trade. However, the entire structure of this relationship changed in 1959, when the Cuban revolutionary government took power and began to fundamentally reshape the nation's economic identity. Driven by this new vision, the Cuban revolutionary government launched a series of bold and sudden moves, seizing these massive American-owned assets and executing a program of nationalization without any financial compensation. This direct challenge to private property rights was seen by the United States government as a hostile act that could not go unanswered amidst the escalating Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. So in response, the United States government moved quickly to cancel sugar import quotas and imposed the first major wave of the economic embargo that continues to this day. This moment marked the beginning of a total severance, where the once inseparable partners became bitter rivals in a long and exhausting economic war. But as the American government cut off this vital lifeline of capital, a new and unexpected power from the other side of the world stepped in to fill the void. The Soviet Union began to provide a massive economic lifeline to Cuba, marking the start of a new era where the island's survival depended on a different kind of global superpower. During the height of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, this relationship with Russia functioned as a vital life support system for the Cuban economy. To maintain its strategic foothold in the Caribbean, Moscow purchased Cuban sugar at prices far above the global market rate, while supplying essential oil at a fraction of its actual cost. This artificial economic structure allowed Cuba to sustain a basic level of stability, despite the growing weight of the American embargo. However, this delicate balance was shattered in 1991, when the Soviet Union unexpectedly collapsed and the massive flow of subsidies vanished almost overnight. The impact was catastrophic, as nearly 80% of Cuba's trade disappeared. plunging the nation into a brutal era of starvation and scarcity known as the Special Period. For years, the people of Cuba endured a landscape of empty shelves and dark streets, searching for any means to survive this sudden economic isolation. In this desperate moment, the nation was eventually saved from total collapse through a unique partnership with Venezuela, where Cuba traded its medical expertise for a steady supply of crude oil. But today, even this last remaining lifeline is fraying to the point of breaking, as the ongoing crisis in Venezuela and its loss of regional influence have left the government in Caracas unable to support its long-standing allies. At the same time, the American shale revolution, which allowed the United States to produce its own massive supplies of oil and gas, has fundamentally shifted the global energy market. This American energy independence has stripped Cuba of its former strategic protections, especially as Washington now enforces a de facto blockade that even Russian tankers struggle to penetrate. With these old pillars of support crumbling one by one, the United States government is now using the invisible rope of financial dominance to tighten its grip on Cuba with surgical precision. This modern strategy represents a fundamental shift from the past, as it moves beyond simply blocking physical goods to attacking the very heart of the Cuban financial system. By officially designating Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism, the United States has effectively activated a sophisticated mechanism that disconnects Cuba from the global banking network. This designation serves as a powerful deterrent, forcing international banks to choose between conducting business with a small Caribbean nation or maintaining their vital access to the American financial market. Fearing the weight of massive fines and exclusion from the dollar-based system, most global institutions have no choice but to sever all ties with Cuba, leaving the nation in a state of total monetary isolation. This pressure extends even to the essential shipments of fuel that Cuba desperately needs to survive. Under the threat of secondary boycotts, shipping companies and insurance providers are increasingly unwilling to risk their global operations to transport oil to Cuban shores. As these tankers are turned away, the consequences are felt immediately across Cuba, where national power plants are forced to shut down and the entire domestic economy begins to wither away. These resulting blackouts and supply shortages are not just temporary inconveniences, but they have paralyzed the daily life of every Cuban citizen. So, as we witness the lives of ordinary Cuban people being choked by this reality, we must ask ourselves a difficult question. Is this unprecedented economic gallows a legitimate tool of foreign policy, or is it the dark result of a powerful obsession in history? To answer this question, we must look at the strategic design behind the U.S. maximum pressure campaign. This strategy is built on a calculated economic logic, which is to maximize the cost of maintaining the current Cuban regime until it reaches a breaking point. By cutting off every possible financial artery, they seek to force an ultimate economic surrender, betting that the weight of the embargo will eventually trigger a fundamental shift in power. In response to this tightening grip, the Cuban government has attempted to adapt by allowing small private enterprises and introducing limited market reforms to ensure its survival. However, these internal changes are like an engine running without fuel, as the relentless American financial blockade prevents these new businesses from accessing the capital and resources they need to grow. Even as Cuba tries to open its doors to the world, the invisible walls of Washington's sanctions keep the domestic economy spinning in place without making any real progress. Ironically, this intense pressure is creating an unexpected opening for America's greatest rivals. As the United States pushes Cuba further into isolation, China and Russia are seizing the opportunity to inject their own capital and influence into the vacuum left behind. In fact, Russia is securing long-term land leases for its companies to establish a permanent economic foothold, while China is rapidly dominating the island's digital infrastructure and telecommunications networks. What was intended as a tool for democratic change is now inadvertently inviting the very authoritarian powers that Washington once sought to exclude from the Caribbean. So, as these conflicting forces clash with entirely different goals, where exactly is the fate of the island of Cuba racing toward? As we look to the horizon, the path forward remains split between two starkly different realities. One possibility is that the relentless pressure from the United States will finally achieve its goal, which is to trigger a fundamental shift toward a democratic system and a market-driven economy. If this happens, it could mark the beginning of a new era of trade, investment, and reintegration into the global community. Alternatively, the growing support from rival superpowers could sustain the current standoff for years to come, keeping the island locked in a perpetual cycle of geopolitical tension and economic stagnation. While politicians and capitalists in Washington and Havana calculate the future value of Cuba as a strategic asset, the ordinary citizens of Havana, the nation's capital, continue to wait for a sign of change. Behind the grand headlines of international sanctions and diplomatic battles, there are millions of people who simply wish for a life free from the constant shadow of scarcity. In the end, it is the nameless individuals who are the first to be crushed under the heavy wheels of history. More important than a declaration of victory from any government is the hope that our neighbors just 90 miles away can finally return to a simple, peaceful life. Ultimately, the true measure of success will not be found in political dominance, but in the moment these families can once again share a warm meal under the glow of a steady light. So, will the coming years bring a new sunrise for the people of Cuba, or will they remain trapped in an eternal night of isolation?